Alright, what's up nerds? This is Cam. Today I'm going to be working on my inventory system, and I'm going to be creating some UI elements today. It should be a short video. I'm just going to walk you through creating some UI, and then in the next few videos we'll make the UI more dynamic. It'll show which items we have in our inventory, and you'll be able to drag inventory items into equip slots to add them to our character. I'm just going to start by making a canvas here. And a canvas is something that you need to handle UI events like on-click and on-drag, which we're going to need for our system. So we're going to put everything as a child of this canvas. And as you can see, this canvas is in screen space overlay, and screen space overlay means it's going to be drawing directly over this camera, which is nice because we want it to be in like a heads-up display style. The first thing I'm going to create is a panel, and we're going to use this to hold all our inventories. So I'm going to call it inventories. And I'm going to get rid of the default image, and I'm going to set the opacity to 0. And then I'm going to create another panel, and this is going to hold a single inventory. So I'm going to call this weapon inventory. And the way this rect transform works can be a little bit tricky because there's different cases and the parameters are going to change depending on the case. If you look at these left, top, right, and bottom, essentially what these are saying is this is going to move your image in the X direction, and top and bottom is going to move your image in the Y direction. And it's based off the placement of your anchors. So if I'm, and then basically, well, anchors are percentage of the screen based, and these are pixel based. So if I change my X here, my X max to 0.5, you can see my anchors, which are these four triangle markers, are now halfway across the screen in my X. And then this 409 means that this image is being stretched 409 pixels past my anchor. So if I set this to 0, it's going to jump back directly to where my anchor is. And if you set something with a pixel base, like if I set this to 409, negative 409, you can run into problems when you're scaling the screen. You can see when I pull this screen, there's a little gap here because I've set it not on percentage, but on pixels. So what you want to do is set everything with anchors, and then just small adjustments with the pixels. So say, for example, I wanted, I'll set this back to 1. If I wanted a border around the outside of the screen for this panel, I could set all of these to 33 pixels. That would give me a static border around the outside that wouldn't scale, but this panel would be percentage based. So I'm always going to have 33 pixels, but the panel will scale up and down depending on the screen size. So that's kind of the rundown of anchors. They can be a bit confusing because there's two cases for them. When anchors fall on top of each other, it kind of changes how the rect transform works. So if I'll remove this, these zeros. So if I scale my X here to 0, then you can see my X anchors fall on top of each other. And that changes this from left and right to position and width. So now this is saying that the width of this is 704 pixels. And then again, that's not scaling with the scene. And the position of this is 352, and that's based off the pivot, the pivot, if you look on the scene, is where this gizmo is being drawn. So one thing I can do is I can change the pivot. So you can do that by holding Shift. I clicked on this box here, which opens up these preset options, or you can change the pivot right here. So I'll do it with this preset. You can press Shift and that little blue dot pops up. So what I'm going to do is press this one here, and that's going to set my anchors and my pivot to the left side of the screen. So if I click that, you can see these values change. Now my position in the X is 0 because my pivot is where my anchors are starting. But the width is still 704. So I can change this to something like 100, and then now I have like a panel here along the side that won't get bigger or smaller when the screen changes. But the problem is that it doesn't get bigger or smaller when the screen gets scaled up as well. So what I want to do is I want to change my anchors to be minimum of 0y and maximum of 1y. So then now you can see my anchors are at the top and the bottom. So now my panel along the side here will scale. So I can change this to 0 and 0 if I want, and then I get a panel all the way along the top, so I can have a nice like heads-up display along the side there. So that's what you're trying to find the balance between when you're setting something with pixels and when you're setting something with percentage. And if it's with percentage, you have to do it with anchors, and if it's with pixels, you do it in your rect transform. Just when you're building UI, try to scale your window to a lot of different like sizes, and make sure that it doesn't look bad in any size, is what you're trying to do. But as long as you set it up properly, it should be fine. So what we can do here is we'll just give this like 20 on the top and 20 on the bottom, and we'll change this to about 75, and that's going to be our inventory display there, and that looks nice. So then what I'm going to add to this is something called a vertical layout group. And a vertical layout group organizes this panel's children in a vertical layout, basically. So what I can do here is I can create a UI image, and I'm going to call this my inventory slot. And this image is automatically part of this vertical layout. So if I duplicate this, you can see it's a bit too big actually. I'll scale it down here. So this, I can make this width by pixels, because I know this panel is set to always be 75 pixels wide, always. So if I make this say 50 pixels, it'll always fit within it. And then I can duplicate this, and you can see it's organizing these images in a vertical layout, and it's spacing them out automatically, which is nice, but it doesn't look great. They're all in the top left corner. But you can change all that here. So instead of saying upper left, I'm going to change this to middle center, and you can give it any alignment. But I'm going to say middle center, and that's basically if I go down to 1, it's going to be right in the middle, and then it's going to move out from there. But I still don't like that they're extremely spread out when there's only 2, because it's trying to spread them out evenly along the entire height of this panel. But that's another thing you can change here. I'm just going to uncheck child force expand for height. And now they're directly beside each other because it's not forcing them to spread out at all. But then I can just add a little bit of spacing. I'm going to say 20 pixels. And then now my 2 inventory slots are spread out. So then I can add more, and it looks nice the entire way, and that looks great. So then you can have an inventory of any size, and it's going to look fine. So what I can do here is I can just duplicate my weapon inventory, and I'm going to call this one item inventory. And I'm going to click on this preset, and I'm going to hold shift to move my pivot point, and I'm going to put my pivot point and my anchor on the right side now. And then another thing I can do is I can release shift here, and then now I'm only affecting my anchors, and then this stretched out red line is going to put them on the bottom and the top of the right side, which is what we want. So if I click that, now if you look at my item inventory, it's got its anchors on the right side, and its position is negative 546, because it is still where we had originally created it, because we duplicated weapon inventory, so it's offset by 546 pixels. So if we set that to 0, it'll pop right back perfectly in place. So now we have 2 inventories that stay along the sides of our scene window here, and scale up and down when the window gets bigger and smaller. And dynamically places elements within a vertical list here. And there's grid lists. So if I wanted to make this like have multiple lines of slots, you could use a grid layout, and there's horizontal layouts as well, and they all work very similarly. So that looks good. The last thing that I'm going to add to this, I'm going to create another panel, and this is going to be my equip slot panel that's going to pop up when I'm equipping stuff to my player. So I'm going to set the pivot and the anchors to the center. And then I'm going to manually change the anchors around here a bit. So what I want is my panel to scale with the scene. So I have to do this percentage wise. So I'm going to set the minimum of the X to be 0.25 and the minimum of the Y to be 0.25. So you can see it's drawing this small square with the 4 triangles. And then I'll change the maximum of the X to 0.75 and the maximum of the Y to 0.75. So now, like that middle section of my screen has those 4 corners, right? So then if I just change my left to 0, so my offset of the left of the panel is going to be 0, the offset of my top is going to be 0, and my right and my bottom. And now my panel fits, and it scales, so it's always 25% of the way in, and it only goes to 75%. And if you scale this all the way down, it's going to have a bit of breaking here. But if your game window is that small, it's going to be pretty much unplayable anyways. So that'll work fine. So what I'm going to do with this panel is I'm going to put another inventory slot on it, and I'm going to change its anchors and its pivot to the center. And then I'm going to manually move its anchors around a bit. So what I can do here is I can move this anchor up. And then use the center of the pivot point to directly position my item there, but then it'll still move dynamically with the scene. So I'm going to change the Y here, and I'm going to say the minimum Y is 0.75 and the maximum Y is 0.75. And now you can see my anchors are here. And one thing to note is this is using percentage of this panel that it's a child of, this panel here, which we can call equip slots or equip panel, sure. So it's using its 75% of the way up of this panel, not of the whole canvas. So it's a good way to place elements within a panel by making a smaller panel and then putting your items in that. So even if we were going to have no panel showing, it's still a good idea to make a panel to group these items in so that you can place them dynamically based off the size of your panel. So I can duplicate this a few times. And, oh, sorry. And so this, it has this big position offset because it's still where we duplicated it. So I'm going to put the position offset to 0, and now it's 75% of the way up in the middle of my panel, no matter what. Yeah, it comes out a little bit, but that's all right for now. And then, so I can do the same thing here. I'll set these offsets to 0. Or actually, no, I got to move their anchors anyway. So for here, I'll change the Y anchor to 0.25. 0.25, so that'll move it down here, and then I'll offset it in the X, so I'll make this 0.25 and this 0.25, and that'll put it on the left side of my panel, and then I can change the offsets to 0, and we have another image there, and then I can do the same thing here, make this 0.75, it's already 0.75, make this 0.75, and then I can change the offsets to 0. And that's not what I wanted. This should be 0.25, sorry, in the Y. And the offset to 0. And that'll place our item there. And then now they're dynamically going to move with the size of the scene. And we have a pretty good looking, I mean, there's no art, but we have a pretty well set up UI system. So the anchors is important how you set them up because it's going to change the way your UI scales with your scene. It takes a little bit of getting used to, especially because, like I said, like sometimes it says position Y and sometimes it says left and right. But it's just something to think about and understand how it works. In the next episode, I'll populate these slots with items we've picked up, and then hopefully we'll be able to drag them over into these. And like the way I know it doesn't look like much now, but this is supposed to be like the slot for your head, and this is your left arm and this is your right arm. So I could drag a weapon on here and my helmet on there, and then that's going to work nice, and that'll be the way you equip your weapons. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I explained it well. It's a bit of a confusing topic, so if you have any questions, don't feel free to shoot them to me, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.